So the name of my presentation are Counterfactuals, Decision-Making and Ethical Alignment in Artificial Intelligence. I'm a master. I have a master's in electrical engineering. And I'm a PhD student in philosophy under the supervisor of Professor Nitamar. So recently, at the last 10 or 20 years, there's been a great adding or concern about ethical issues involving artificial intelligence. There are several meta-analyses that show the increase on publications regarding ethical guidelines for intelligent autonomous systems. What these ethical guidelines they talk about or what they don't talk about is something that I'm not gonna talk about in this presentation. But basically what AI safety is about and AI ethics is about is how to make the interaction between humans and AI safe, okay? And there is a big consensus in the literature that on several research agendas that we find is that a better understanding of counterfactual reasoning can help us deal with many problems found in AI safety. I'm not going to list all of these problems, but I can talk about them after, during the questionings. But like I said, there is a consensus among researchers in the field, like counterfactual reasoning is something that we poorly understand in terms of decision theory. And if we could have a better rigorous formal theory for counterfactuals, we could mitigate many problems that we have regarding the unpredictability of autonomous systems. And for any of you who is interesting, there is a collection in literature. One article I can cite is The Surprising Creativity of Digital Evolution, a collection of anecdotes from the evolutionary computation and artificial life research communities. They give like hundreds and hundreds of examples of how these kinds of systems, they do extremely unexpected things. And some of these kind of things that they do when they are deployed in the real world can be dangerous, can be harmful. I can give many examples, but I can leave that to the questions. And what do I say about counterfactual thinking or counterfactual reasoning? Is the concept that involves the ability of the human mind to create contrary alternatives to what actually happened. Those events that do not occur have an effect on our experience and the way human agents influence the environment. So, for example, I don't go outside because I can get coronavirus and I can die, but that didn't happen. But how can something that didn't happen can influence the real world? Like there's a problem of causation here. But, oh, it could happen. So this is the kind of reasoning that counterfactuals, yeah, if this A, then that would be B. If I would go outside, then I would get coronavirus. So I don't go outside. But how can something that it doesn't happen or it didn't happen can influence me? So it's a strange form of decision-making that in one way or another certainly occurs in mental processes and is vital for human mental processes. In cognitive sciences, is believed that the imagination of alternative realities, called rational imagination, is something intrinsically linked to rational thinking, the formation of rational intentions and human reasoning in general. A great example of this is there a research from Pascal Leon, which he showed this research here, modulation of muscular responses evoked by transcranial magnetic stimulation during the acquisition of fine motor skills playing the piano. He showed that like people who actually play the piano, like really simplifying the article, who trained like to play the piano for a couple of weeks, and people who only imagining playing the piano had the same kind of neurological changes. So is this thing of like something that it didn't happen, or just your rational imagination affecting your responses, your anatomy, feelings of guilt? Like counterfactuals affect people in many ways. And that there is also an important thing that people learn from counterfactuals. Like if I do something and it gives me bad reward, then I can think, oh, if I didn't do that, maybe it would be better. So people learn from things sometimes that it didn't happen. And this is a kind of quality or attribute that we would like our kind of systems to have. Like, you don't make the mistake, first of all. And if you do make a mistake or make a wrong decision, learn from the decision that you didn't make. But this is a problem, especially for decision theory. When we talk about decision theory, mainly like decision theories, like all that I know, they are different ways to try to formalize counterfactuals. And there are two mainstream decision theories, which is causal decision theory and evidential decision theory. And they both like try to formalize counterfactual thinking in different ways. I'm not going to go through the formalism, but I can go after. But like the basic difference between causal decision theory and evidential decision theory arises from the fact that the probability of a conditional, that is the case of CDT, causal decision theory, is not always the same as the conditional probability, which is the case of evidential decision theory, which results in a situation where, depending the model chosen, decision-making may differ for the same problem. One of the most famous problems in the literature that show this is the Newcomb's problem from Nosvik. So like CDT problems with these kinds of models. Causal decision theory, it fails to, it ignores the casual link between the environment and the decision maker. So the decision maker is an uncaused cause. I caused the world, but nothing causes me. So it fails in simple decision-making problems like the psychopathic button. I can talk about what the psychopathic button is after. And evidential decision theory is the complete opposite. Like it ignores the distinction between correlation and cause. So like evidence is what you use to maximize the utility, but not the correlation. So an evidential decision theory would kill the messenger if he has a bad news, because I don't hear the news. What I care is about the evidence. So we can see that in different ways to formalize how counterfactual probabilities are measured, you get different decisions. And like CDT and ADT are the mainstream decision theories. There are other proposals. There's timeless decision theory. There's updateless decision theory. There's algorithmic decision theory. There's functional decision theory. And all of those are different ways to define counterfactuals. And all of those are kind of unsatisfactory, is a way of saying it. And one of these, the obstacles where we face two main obstacles. First is because of like a Bayesian obstacle. Most CDT and EDT models do not provide a way to define probabilities of action that an agent does not make. Bayesian theory, when we try to condition the probability of event A to an action B, which I didn't do action B. So therefore, it has zero probability. So we have this problem that is, I have an undefined answer, because if I try to do Bayesian updating using an action that I didn't take, I get a divide by zero, and that doesn't work. Okay, and that is something that we call is one of the Achilles heels of Bayesianism, is the dogmatism of perception. Observations are believed with probability 1. Everything you observe has probability 1. So once we know that, so something that I didn't observe has zero probability. So how can I deal with that? There are extensions from Bayesianism, like radical probabilism, which try to deal with that, but I'm not going to go there. But it's really interesting for people who want to know. Radical probabilism, great philosophy. And so this makes all counterfactuals impossible. Everything that I didn't do, it will never happen. So an agent cannot update his experiences based on actions that he didn't take. So he cannot learn counterfactually. And the opposite of this is the Lobian obstacle. In the same way that standard Bayesian updates discard any kind of like counterfactual evidence, virtual evidence that can help us in a kind of decision making, if we are not careful in the way we like endorse any probabilities, we can like spurious counterfactuals, which is everything is possible can happen. And this is due to the Lob's theorem. Lob's theorem says that any proposal P, if you can prove that a proof of P will imply the truth of P, then there is a proof of P. This is one of the mathematical corollary results of Gödel's theorem. So what I'm saying here in this simple line is, if a proof of P, if you can prove that a proof of P implies P, so like proof equals truth, then there is a proof of P. You can always find a proof if your system is like strong enough. In this case, it's for piano arithmetic, but like a strong formal system like any Turing complete language would also apply. So according to Lob's theorems, any counterfactual, no matter how improbable, if some way the reasoner can prove that this counterfactual is probable, like I can fly, then this counterfactual is probabilistically very possible. So this is lead us to a stalemate, or counterfactual probabilities, no matter how likely, have zero probability, or spurious counterfactuals, like the most absurd kind of thing, receive high probability. So what do I do? What do we do? So this is basically like the problem with Bayesian priors, like where do priors come from? This is like, I'm a Bayesianist, but like I know all the, Bayesianism has a lot of problems. And one of the biggest problems is like, where do your priors come from? People can tell me, especially people who work on decision theory, but we know the prior distribution. If you take action A is 60%, if you take action B is 40%. But that's not what happened in the real world. Like, I don't know the probability distribution of what is going to happen. Like, sometimes I don't know. So where do you get your priors? That's a question that no Bayesian should ask. Like, it's a forbidden question. Like, don't tell you what you get your priors, because no one knows where priors come from. So like the problem with counterfactual is how to get good priors. What is a good hyper prior? What is a good hyper prior probability distribution to deal with problems like normative problems, like empirical problems, like the problems which artificial intelligence systems has to solve? And there are many proposals of hyper priors. One I can say is like the principle of indifference is one hyper prior. So let's assume that, but what we like I said, when we have no information available to the agent, like I don't know the probability distribution of the actions and observations. Like I don't know if I take action A is going to happen something, and I don't know what's the probability if I take action B is going to happen something. What I do when I have no information available. One of the most famous hyperpriors is the principle of indifference. But let's take this example. Like, say X is the probability that an agent will get 1 billion in utility. If we make a probability distribution using the principle of indifference, this proposal will have a 50-50, like true or false, so like you win or lose. Therefore, the value for this bet is 500 million reais, and the agent should be willing to, a rational agent, according to expected utility theory, should be willing to pay that amount to accept the bet. But like you probably say, no, Nicholas, you're a PhD student in philosophy. You don't have 1 billion in utility, so I'm not going to take this bet. But how do you know that? How do you get that prior probability distribution? Because it's very improbable. But how do I define that? Like algorithmically, that is the question that we want to answer. And another problem with unknown probability distributions is Dutch booking. It is important when the odds are distributing among possible consequences that is done in a balanced way, so that Dutch books cannot be done against the agent. A Dutch book is a sequence of decision that applies certain laws. It's like bookies make money and casinos and stuff like that. So let's say that you don't know the probability distribution from a fair coin toss, and you're going to say, the probability of head is 6%, is 0.6, and the probability of tails is 0.7. At this distribution, I can offer you the bet that like you give me $1 to play a game, heads or tails. If tails or heads lands, I give you 80 cents. So like if you do the expected utility of this kind of game is like the probability of heads, 0.6 times the utility, 0.8, you sum everything. So like the expected utility is $1.04. So you're gonna trade me $1. You're gonna trade me 80 cents. You're gonna give me $1, and I'm gonna give you 80 cents, and I'm gonna keep Dutching booking you. So like this is one of the problems when we don't know how to rightly distribute probabilities. We can get Dutch book. So, and there are many more problems involving counterfactuals. Problems now I'm going to diverge a little from decision theory, because I think it's important, like, to trying to solve problems involving counterfactuals that do not exactly involve decision theory. It's kind of nice, like, to go to areas like logic, formal semantics, epistemology, metaphysics, because they raise different problems, and these problems can help us understand like this kind of entities. Like the problems that I'm going to cite now are basically Goodman problems, and also some of the problems which were raised by Quine, which was one of the first critics of counterfactual analysis, that he gave the impossibility of expressing counterfactuals within classical logic. And what are these problems? Is vagueness, non-monotonicity, and context dependence. So what is the problems of vagueness? The use of model logic to express counterfactual conditional had led to several different theories and divisions within academic community. Currently, theories are still divided. Like, there are many ways to analyze counterfactuals and how to best formalize and understand the counterfactuals. It's like an open debate. And like the three concepts that I say, like I said, it was proposed by Nelson Goodman. The first problem being like the vagueness of counterfactuals. When we deal with indicative conditionals, statements like if P then Q are true whenever the antecedent P is false. But like counterfactual antecedents, they are always by necessity, they are false. So they should be always true. But that shouldn't be the case. Like sometimes counterfactuals ain't true. I can give you like a bunch of counterfactual examples that like are metaphysically impossible. So there's the problem of vagueness, like counterfactuals can only be vaguely true. But how do you determine that? This is one of the problems. Like one of the ways is like if a counterfactual reaches a certain probability, then there is true, but then you have to create, how do you measure this probability? And another example of Goodman, and it is one of like the criticisms of Quine, is that with this example, which is context dependence, like if this like these two phrases, if that piece of butter had been heated to 150 degrees, it would have melted. If that piece of butter had been heated to 150 degrees, it would have melted. Like these both statements are true for counterfactual analysis, but that can be because they are contradictions, they are opposites. So like they can only be vaguely true. So how can you distinguish like which one is more true than the other? Which one is more probable than the other? The second problem is context dependence of counterfactuals. This is like the Quine's objections, that he said that the following two statements, which are about a temporally displaced Roman general, it is impossible to determine which could be true than the other. Like if Caesar had been in command of Korea, he would have used catapults. If Caesar had been in command of Korea, he would have used the atomic bomb. According to Quine, like you cannot tell which one is true or more vaguely true than the other. Because on his opinion, counterfactuals, they depend on context of the orator, of the decision maker. And the third problem is non-monotonicity. They're like, counterfactuals are non-monotonic, which mean that, like, how can I say that? Like, I'm sorry, I forgot the word, but as you keep putting antecedents in a counterfactual proposition, you can change their truth value. So like, if I had lit this match, it would have lit. If I had lit this match and I have done in a room without oxygen, it would have lit. That is false. So like, depending on the way that you increase the strength of the antecedent, like counterfactuals flip from true to false. So for Goodman, he argues that like, it's extremely difficult to specify all the details all the numerous factors of the background. But he said, like, to adequately specify all the background factors together with the physical laws would be extremely complex in here is say non-confrontational, sorry, it's non-counterfactual, in a non-counterfactual semantic terms. Like, to define everything that the background offers and is responsible in semantic terms is impossible. And I agree with Goodman. So like, but instead of thinking of these points as problems, we can define them as the very characteristics that define counterfactuals. From a pragmatic point of view, the problem cited above of vagueness, counterfactuals are not functional to the truth. Context dependence, counterfactual have context-sensitive conditions of truth, and non-monoticity. Counterfactuals are interpreted in a non-monotonic way. They can values of truth or false, like they can flip. These are the central characteristics of counterfactuals, so that any theory that seeks to analyze and formalize these entities must be able to cope with these demands. So like, I have like review now, like from semantics, like the logic of language, and like from decision theory. And there are several proposals for the analysis of counterfactuals. The possible world semantics from Lewis and Stalnaker, the theories of counterfactual dependence from Adams, strict counterfactual analysis, and I'm not going to try to say this guy's names, and the causal models and structural equations from Judea Pearl. And all of these models, they try to deal with counterfactuals in different ways. So this is like, what is the problem? Like to me, like after reading the whole, I cannot say that I read the whole literature because the literature about counterfactual is quite extensive, but I read a lot. And like, to me, like, which I'm interested in decision theory and how to formalize counterfactuals more formally. The problem of them is how to represent probabilistic knowledge about probabilistic knowledge. How do you assign probabilities to probabilities? Is the problem of priors? Is the problem of how you unite logic and probability? Is the problem of hyperpriors? Is the problem of logical uncertainty? How do you mix logic, truth and values with probability without like being, I don't know, vulnerable to the principle of explosion? How do you do that? How do you unite all of these things? And there have been some proposals of probabilistic model logic, but I have recently written an article and have been inspired by this article, which I recommend, which Why Philosophers Should Care About Computational Complexity, of Scott Harrison. And computational complexity is a field which I'm more familiar since I come from more exact area of science, like engineering and stuff, and I deal with computation. And complexity theory has already been used to solve problems involving sequences of random numbers, Kolmogorov, and the definition of inductive inference, like with Solomonoff induction, which is like the golden standard for AI at the moment, and in general artificial intelligent models by Shane and Hunter, and even to model biological evolution by Chaitin. Like Solomonoff, Kolmogorov, and Chaitin, they are the founding fathers of algorithmic information and algorithmic complexity. So inspired by this type of interdisciplinary research, which invites philosophers to study other areas in the same way that we invite others to study philosophy, we propose a new model for counterfactual analysis by algorithmic complexity. My presentation is just, I focus on like just showing like the problems of counterfactuals. And I have recently written an article with the name is Counterfactual Analysis by Algorithmic Complexity, a metric between possible worlds. It's now under revision by my loving advisor. And it gives like a new way to deal with counterfactuals in a non-semantic form. It proposes a metric between possible worlds and gives a way like to answer some of the questions, like questions of like there's the Lewis Stalnaker debate about the plurality assumption and limit assumption between possible worlds. It gives like an answer to how can we answer this question. It gives a way to give hyper prior distribution for unknown probabilities based on this metric. So I give like one of the greatest critics to Lewis and Stalnaker's work is that their similarity semantics is totally informal. It's not rigorous at all. So this is one of the things that I try to make, give a formal definition for metrics between possible worlds, between possible world states. So using this metric, I can give distances from possible worlds and assign probabilities to unknown distributions, which you can use to condition these probabilities to use on decision theory. And also like to the problems raised by Goodman involving like monotonicity, vagueness, and context dependence. It also gives another way to understand these kinds of concepts. I'm not gonna go into the details, but especially the objection made by Quine, viewing the problem of counterfactual analysis not by semantics but by algorithmic complexity, we see that actually counterfactuals are not context dependent. What is the problem is they are information dependent. Like it depends on the information embedded. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm hearing a bunch of stuff on my mic. Someone is with the mic on. But finishing now, like the problem raised by Quine of context dependence can be reinterpreted as information. Like there is a lack of information from the orator, when that example from like Caesar is actually like a problem from a agent totally disembodied from an environment. But if we can ground the agent in an environment and we have information about that environment, then we can assign distribution of probabilities to true or false propositions for counterfactuals. I hope that I have not passed my tempo. I would really like to show like this new form of counterfactual analysis, but it would take a long time. It's like a 60-page article. And that is that. If you have any questions, that was my presentation. Thank you for hearing me.
All right, Nicholas, thank you very much. Now we're gonna be opening for questions, comments. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Mariana.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nicholas, for your presentation and the dialogue we already have by email yesterday. And my question is, do you have some application for this model and some way of surpassing Quine's objection you mentioned in your talk? Thank you so much.
Yes, in the article that I wrote, I give like, there is an example, an argument that I invented, which is called the binary lottery. And the binary lottery argument, like it's the discussion between Stalnaker and Lewis about like the singularity of possible worlds and the limit assumption, like it settles that. Like the only way that you can counter argument that argument, if you can prove that is a way to generate specific random sequences, and that's a contradiction. You cannot do that. If you can generate specific random sequences, you can win the lottery whenever you want. So like, this is like one application of like, it's in my opinion, if like all the assumptions that I make during the article are correct, like, so that conversation is like, it's over, it's done. Not that I don't mean to say that I know that philosophy doesn't work like that, but I come from engineering, so like I like to solve problems, so like pick a problem and solve it. So like there's my proof. Quod eram demonstratum, I demonstrated. If you want to raise a counter argument, you're going to have to prove that random sequences are not random, which is a contradiction. And the problem of Quine, the argument is that when you use a non-semantic form, which I try to use using algorithmic complexity, the example of Quine of like, if Caesar was in command of Korea, he used catapults. If Caesar was in command of Korea, he would have used atomic bombs. That is the example. So is a temporally misplaced Roman general, and we don't know where he is. So like the orator, and he says like the dependence of the counterfactual, it depends on the orator. But like this orator that he's referring to is like, who is this orator? Where he is in time? Like there's missing information in that example, in my opinion. It's not a problem of context dependence. It's the problem that you created an agent, an orator, which is completely disembedded from reality. So I cannot give you any answer. But if you embed him in reality, so say like, this orator, like, just tell me one thing, like, is he a Roman general in the Roman area? Or actually he was put in a time machine and he's now in control of North Korea during 1997 and 1993. Like, tell me where he is. Then I can tell you which one of the proposition is more true than the other, more vaguely true. So in fact, then we see that there's not a problem of context dependence, is a problem of disembeddedness and lack of information, which for me is not the same thing. And this is my argument.
Yes. I was Google, but I would like to know what you know about Bayesian robotics, because you explained that we have many problems with Bayesian calculations, but at the same time we have many people right now saying that the Bayesian brain theory will be very successful, and at the same time people are I was looking at that, building robots with Bayesian algorithms. So and Bayesian formulas are very useful to explain perception. They are really useful. Some of my students are using it to explain, for example, color perception, and it's really, I don't know, you don't get a falsification very very easily of this kind of explanation. So what would you say? What do you know? Do you know more about Bayesian robotics?
Yes, Professor, thank you for the question. As I said during my presentation, I am a Bayesian myself. So like, I'm really like, but like, one of the problem with Bayesianism is that like, for some people, Bayesianism is like a religion. If you people never heard about the Bayesian conspiracy, you're not Bayesians. But there is the Bayesian conspiracy, and many people are a part of it. And so yeah, like when we deal with like artificial intelligence, like Bayes' rule is like the paradigm. But there is a problem with Bayes' rule. It is like it doesn't scale very well, and is untrackable. Like it doesn't work in the real world. When we say like we want to build artificial general intelligence, like for example, Bayesianism, it really works well when you're dealing with what we call a Cartesian model. So like there's the agent and there's the environment. And the agent and the environment, they change like signals. So like the agent has observations from the environment, and these observations, there are sensory input and rewards. This is reinforcement learning. And the agent can act on the environment. And like there is this like, it's like a video game, like I'm playing with my joystick and the environment is responding to me. And this is okay, because like the thing with like Bayes assume that the agent is much, much bigger than the environment. So like the agent knows the probability distribution. So like what we call this in reinforcement learning is like the transfer function. A transfer function is like a probability distribution of like, if I take action A, to which world state will I go? If I take action B, to which world state will I go? If I take action C, to which world state will I go? And in simple models for like building an autonomous vehicle or giving like, I don't know, recommendations on Netflix, That works perfectly, no problem. So it's a good model. It's a really good model. But like, what happens when you don't know the distribution of probability? And the environment, like in my case, like when we are talking about embedded agents in the real world, the environment, it's too big. Like Bayesianism, like I said, it supposes like something which is called logical omniscience. The agent knows the whole probability distribution. So the agent is basically like the whole world, the whole environment fits inside the head of the agent. That's not the case in real life. Like the universe doesn't fit inside my head. Like I have no idea about like the probability distributions of my actions right now. But somehow I can do things and solve problems. How, I don't know. If I do, I would build the artificial general intelligence. So like when we are dealing with like embedded agents, so what is an embedded agent? An agent which is smaller than the environment, which has to deal with a much larger environment, which does not fit in, is like the real world, the real model of the world is not on the hypothesis space of the agent. And that is where like the Bayes theorem breaks down. Like the real world is not on your hypothesis space, because the real world is too big and you don't know the probability distribution. How can you infer, how can you discover this unknown probability distributions? You need a hyper prior. You need a way to assign probabilities to those probabilities which are more probable. So how, as I said, a way to talk about probabilities, probabilistic knowledge about probabilistic knowledge.
Just a final comment. Thank you very much. It was a good answer. But you know, Nicholas, this kind of argument that you gave me, it's a very good argument, but it's a very good argument so that one could sustain biological evolutionism as a base to explain all human perceptual and cognitive bias or priors, you know? Because where are our priors in our DNA?
Yes. Yes.
You see?
Yes.
You don't need to program. We already have our program, you know?
No, exactly. No, I totally agree with you, Professor. It's like the problem is, as you said, like we already have like, the problem is like the way you put it, like what we have already in the DNA. Perfectly put it. Love your answer. But like, I don't know how to read my own source code. That is the problem. Like, if I want, like, I come from the research field of artificial intelligence, which mean like the Darth Moon Summer Project. What do we want to do? We want to build intelligence, artificial intelligence, or something that replicates intelligence. I'm not going to go discussing definitions about intelligence here. But if you want to achieve intelligent behavior or human-like behavior, I'm going to have to pick this code, which I don't know how to read. I don't know how to read my own source code. And I'm going to have to translate it in a way that is algorithmically, and I can like put to a machine to do. So like, yeah, of course, like we get our priors, like something that is completely intuitive to human reasoning, like Occam's razor. Like why I'm not going to go into a bet with Nicholas with $1 billion because he's a PhD student and PhD students don't have $1 billion. This Occam's razor is the most simple answer, but like, how do you define that?
That's simple, right?
That's super simple. And we have a lot of these biases and heuristics and mental shortcuts to deal with problems. And many of like, for example, one simple one, human beings, we discount reward hyperbolically. Like we prefer reward which comes sooner than the reward that comes after. So like if I want to create an artificial intelligent agent that it can deal with humans in a better way, I have to make him understand that this thing that he's interacting, a human being, discounts reward hyperbolically. He prefers to receive the sandwich now than the sandwich 2 days from now. Doesn't matter if the reward of the sandwich is the same. So all of these priors and heuristics and all of that, they need to be accounted for when we try to define artificial intelligence and human AI interaction. So the interaction is smooth and like normative and safe and value, and no dystopian futures are allowed. And what I did in this article that I'm co-authoring with my handsome advisor is like to pick two priors which I think are philosophically justifiable, which is similarity and simplicity, put them in a mathematical form and use it to describe the distance between possible worlds, which I think was what Stalnaker and Lewis wanted. They just didn't have the tools. And like these tools came after. Unfortunately, like Stalnaker is still alive, but Lewis unfortunately has gone. So, yeah.
Okay, we have two more questions. One is for you, Nicholas, by Bruno Coelho. The other question from Cristiano Batista. Feel free to raise your questions in English or Portuguese if you want to.
Eu vou fazer uma questão em português mesmo. Nicholas, eu gostaria que você comentasse, clarificasse um pouco mais sobre esse modelo que se desenvolveu, porque assim, tem algumas propostas, por exemplo, do Marcus Coulter, que assim, seria o gold standard para um modelo de inteligência artificial. Só que é incomputável. Então, ele tem que fazer aproximações para poder fazer o teste, né? Quer dizer, mesmo sendo o limite, ainda assim tem que fazer aproximações. Eu gostaria que você comentasse, no seu caso, que pareceu ter uma base informacional também. Seria uma distância inferencial.
Sim. Muito perfeito, meu colega. Eu vou falar em português, tá, pessoal? Porque meu inglês eu tô vendo que é uma porcaria. Achei que eu ia representar bem inglês e não aconteceu. Mas, Bruno, eu acho que o que tu tá comentando, tipo, the gold standard for a inteligência artificial geral é AIXI, que foi proposto por Marcus Hunter e o Shane Legg.
Sim.
E ele... exatamente. E realmente é o padrão, assim, eles definem um método de inferência indutiva perfeito, universal, e tipo, se fosse computável, ele resolve qualquer problema. Ele literalmente resolve qualquer problema. Ele só demora muito tempo. E ele se baseia na distribuição de probabilidade universal que foi proposta por Solomonoff. E sim, eu utilizo ferramentas parecidas com essas. Eu utilizo complexidade de Kolmogorov, que na verdade é complexidade algorítmica, eu gosto de chamar, porque a gente acaba dando todo o crédito para o Kolmogorov. Não é bem assim. E, então, eu utilizo complexidade algorítmica e eu também uso a distribuição universal de probabilidade. E um dos problemas do meu modelo é que eu também, para atacar o problema de contrafactuais, o que eu fiz? Eu peguei ferramentas com infinito poder. Elas são infinitamente poderosas, que é a complexidade de Kolmogorov e a complexidade algorítmica e a distribuição universal de probabilidade. Mas uma coisa que eu gostaria de mencionar, só para terminar essa pergunta rapidinho, é que quando tu quer lidar com problemas extremamente difíceis, uma boa estratégia é presumir que tu tem poderes infinitos. Então, assim, por exemplo, quando o Alan Turing ele quis resolver um problema envolvendo a falta de bijecção entre números reais e números naturais, ele criou um artefato matemático que se chama máquina de Turing. A máquina de Turing é incomputável, ela é só um artefato matemático. Tu não tem um cabeçote com uma fita infinita e uma memória infinita. Isso não existe. Mas acontece que tu pode aproximar isso. E quando tu aproxima isso, tu tem esse computadorzinho lindo aqui que eu tô vendo vocês e tá todo mundo utilizando, sabe? Então, da mesma maneira que complexidade algorítmica é incomputável e a distribuição universal ela é incomputável, ela pode ser aproximada. E a melhor maneira de aproximar ela, que eu cito no artigo que eu escrevi, é pelo o problema de compressão. compressão e complexidade algorítmica é muito parecido. Dizer qual é o menor algorítmico que computaria essa sequência é muito parecido do que perguntar qual é o zip file que conteria esse algoritmo, que conteria esse estado de mundo. Então, as perguntas são muito parecidas. Então, uma maneira de tu conseguir aproximar esse ideal, esse modelo ideal, é, em vez de tu usar ferramentas com poder infinito, como complexidade algorítmica e a distribuição universal, usa um compressor bem forte. E isso é, tipo, hoje em dia, um pouco do estado da arte que a gente está usando para resolver problemas de inteligência artificial. Comprime o estado de mundo e tenta procurar por similaridades entre, não no estado de mundo real, mas na sua versão comprimida. Isso auxilia um monte em problemas de inferência indutiva. E o engraçado é que isso é mais ou menos o que o ser humano faz. A gente comprime o mundo, porque o mundo não cabe na minha cabeça, o mundo é muito grande, o mundo é maior do que eu. Então eu tenho que comprimir ele dentro de mim e eu procuro pelas similaridades estatísticas, probabilísticas e faço as minhas inferências indutivas.
Ok, mais duas perguntas aqui do Cristiano e da Mariana.
Boa tarde. Bom, vocês estão me ouvindo bem? Estão, né? Primeiro eu queria mandar um abraço para a PUC-RS, em nome do professor Nitamar, que no começo da minha graduação eu fiz lá, então eu tenho um carinho especial. Manda um abraço para todo mundo lá, por favor. E assim, Nicolas, eu acho que eu peguei no momento certo, que você estava justamente falando dessa capacidade infinita, tal, quer dizer lá. Né? Eu estudo filosofia da religião, e um dos problemas que eu trato é justamente sobre a minha dissertação de mestrado, por exemplo, agora eu estou no doutorado. A minha dissertação de mestrado foi a respeito de uma hipótese, de uma tese teísta, que se chama teísmo aberto. O teísmo aberto, ele vai dizer o seguinte: é uma teoria libertária, ou seja, ela defende que o ser humano ele tem livre-arbítrio, com base no fato de que Deus, mesmo sendo onisciente, ele é onisciente nos seguintes termos: ele conhece, a presciência dele, mais especificamente, ela é limitada ao que é logicamente possível conhecer. Ou seja, logo ele não saberia o futuro, porque o futuro, uma vez que ele não se realizou ainda, ele não é passível de se atribuir um valor de verdade. Né? Faltaria a ele um truth maker. Né? Então, seria essa a teoria. Só que aí, eu estou para escrever um artigo que fala justamente sobre isso, que é tipo assim, os limites da capacidade de conhecimento de Deus dentro dessa hipótese do teísmo aberto, né? Talvez a minha pergunta seja uma pergunta longa para uma resposta super rápida sua, mas enfim, eu vou fazer ela assim mesmo, que é o seguinte: se a gente pensar nessa capacidade da onisciência de Deus como sendo um modelo infinito e infalível, entendeu? Então, por exemplo, Deus é um modelo que, tipo, ele sabe todas as probabilidades. Sim. Ele conhece, ponto. Entendeu? E, além disso, ele conhece o homem, ele conhece a personalidade de cada um, ele conhece tudo. A minha pergunta é, se a gente pensar nesse modelo perfeito, tá? Ainda assim, haveria espaço para alguma probabilidade? Existiria probabilidade ou a gente viveria num mundo meramente determinístico? E isso
isso é uma excelente pergunta.
Isso, inclusive, é uma coisa que vai influenciar na nossa capacidade de ter livre-arbítrio. Porque se eu chego à conclusão que um modelo que calcula tudo com perfeição não tem como outro resultado um mundo determinístico, então isso anularia completamente qualquer possibilidade de livre-arbítrio. Queria que você falasse um pouco sobre isso. Perfeito. Já agradecendo de antemão.
Cristiano, adorei a tua pergunta. Muito obrigado. Primeira coisa, assim, vou responder a tua pergunta rapidamente, em duas partes, tá? Eu recomendo, se tu tem interesse sobre, tipo assim, seria uma prova teísta sobre livre-arbítrio. Tem um matemático que eu gosto muito, o nome dele é John Conway. Ele é um dos inventores do The Game of Life. E outras contribuições fantásticas para a matemática. Ele era um cara brilhante. Eu tive a possibilidade de assistir uma aula dele uma vez que ele veio no Brasil. E eu babei. E ele tem uma prova de que o livre-arbítrio existe. Ele tem uma prova matemática de que o livre-arbítrio existe. mas acontece que é uma espécie de livre-arbítrio totalmente não antropomórfico, porque para ele diz assim, se livre-arbítrio existe, então todos têm livre-arbítrio, tipo, do ser humano até a partícula atômica. Essa é a defesa dele. E eu acho, tipo assim, até hoje, para mim, foi uma das melhores defesas do livre-arbítrio, de uma maneira assim, ó, determinística, matemática, uma coisa que às vezes as pessoas acham que não, que se tu for apelar para matemática e para o lado analítico, tu vai acabar com uma coisa totalmente determinista, e ele acaba provando totalmente o contrário. Eu acho exatamente, sounds like Spinoza, professor, totalmente. Como é fantástico. E agora, respondendo a segunda parte da tua pergunta, sim, isso é uma coisa muito interessante, porque a distribuição universal de probabilidade, ela só consegue encompassar o universo computável. E o que eu quero dizer com o universo computável? Tá? Quando o Alan Turing ele fez o famoso paper dele on the Einstein problem and on computable numbers, ele mostrou que, assim, ó, da mesma maneira que o Cantor ele mostrou que não existe uma relação bijectiva entre os números reais, ou seja, todas as expansões decimais possíveis, e os números naturais, não existe. Turing mostrou que, assim, ó, existe um número infinito de algoritmos, de máquinas de Turing, de computadores, só que existe um número infinito muito, 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 muito maior de funções que são incomputáveis. Então, assim, esse é o famoso problema da parada de Turing, e essa também é a limitação do modelo computacional. O meu modelo contrafactual, eu só consigo lidar com universos e estados de mundos que são computáveis, porque, e o engraçado, esses são a absurda minoria. O fato de que nós vivemos num universo de que, por um motivo ou outro, ele é computável no sentido que ele existe padrões, existem regras determinísticas, como, sei lá, a distribuição de energia entre um próton e um elétron, a lei da gravidade, o valor da velocidade da luz, esses são números fixos e determinísticos, eles dão uma certa estrutura para o universo. Se o universo ele não fosse assim, se ele fosse totalmente aleatório e estocástico, a gente não ia estar aqui tendo essa conversa. Mas a maior parte dos estados de mundo possíveis, eles são totalmente incomputáveis. Ou seja, nenhuma máquina de Turing poderia computar ou prever eles. Então, mesmo no caso de um agente racionalmente perfeito, como é a XI, que a gente pode chamar de Deus, se tu quiser, o computador que conhece todo o espaço, ele consegue computar por todos os espaços computáveis possíveis. Esse agente, ele ainda não consegue alcançar esse número. E, tipo, quando eu falo todo o espaço computável possível, isso é gigante, isso é enorme, é enorme mesmo. Eu escrevi esse número no paper que eu estou fazendo com o professor Itamar, é um número meio que absurdo, assim, é grotesco. E só acontece que o número de estados de mundo e universos não computáveis, ele é absurdamente maior, ele é tipo, o computável ele é um grão de areia na praia, e a praia é não computável. Então, é um Lovecraftian number, isso mesmo. Então, mesmo que se tu tivesse esse agente com toda essa capacidade computacional, ele não conseguiria atingir o todo, porque, na verdade, o todo mesmo, e quando eu digo todo, eu quero dizer, tipo, uma coisa básica, tipo, os números reais. Tipo, todos os números que existem entre 0 e 1. Tipo, existem mais números entre 0 e 1 do que 0 ao infinito dos números naturais. E isso é uma coisa que, para matemáticos, tipo, uau, fantástico. E esse é um dos maiores problemas do modelo computacional do Turing. Não existe uma relação. A gente não consegue. Uma maneira intuitiva de explicar isso existem mais problemas do que algoritmos para solucionar problemas. Existem um número infinito de algoritmos, mas existe um número infinito muito maior de problemas que não tem algoritmos para solucionar. Um deles é o problema de parada, outro deles é o problema de complexidade algorítmica, e assim vai indo. Então, Deus deve ser alguma... Tipo, eu não entendo muito de teologia, tá? Mas se eu fosse chutar, assim, Deus deve ser uma função computável, incomputável, furiosa.
Bom, tem a pergunta aqui da Mariana. Do you want to ask the question, Mariana?
Talvez posso fazer em português, então.
Fique à vontade.
Nicolas, novamente, obrigada. Eu só queria ver o que você acha a respeito não sei se você conhece os trabalhos da ética da responsabilidade do Hans Jonas, né? E o Jonas, ele propõe um tipo de raciocínio factual, só que fundado em linguagem comum, nas línguas naturais, né? E ele, o que ele faz? Ele sugere que se crie mundos possíveis e se decida considerando o pior deles, quer dizer, que o pior seja o parâmetro decisório para justamente evitá-lo, né? Agora, o que acontece? Esse é um tipo de raciocínio contrafactual que, para a ética, a meu ver, é um dos mais relevantes, né? E só que, é claro, você não vai conseguir, eu acho que você estava falando desse problema da computabilidade, né? Você não vai facilmente conseguir encontrar os critérios de relevância apropriados justamente para criar modelos computacionais, né? Para esse tipo de formalização do raciocínio. Então, enfim, no caso do Hans Jonas, quer dizer, a vagueza da linguagem natural pode ser uma vantagem para possibilitar escolhas que, enfim, são eticamente muito relevantes, mas não me parecem computáveis por todas as razões que você já apresentou. Muito obrigada, Nicolas.
Nesse ponto, professora Mariana, muito obrigado, tá, pela pergunta. Nesse ponto, eu não conheço a obra do Hans Jonas, tá? Então, eu acho que seria... Eu só vou dar a minha opinião, mas eu não quero criticar ele de nenhuma forma. Na minha opinião, pelo que eu entendo de teoria da computação, sistema que pode ser representado de uma forma simbólica, ele pode ser representado numa linguagem Turing completa. Então, tipo, linguagem e um sistema formal Turing completo, para mim, assim, eu tô falando a mesma coisa. Tanto que, tipo, um jeito de explicar o que é um algoritmo é um livro de receita. Tipo, tudo que tu pode escrever num livro de receita, por exemplo, assim, se tu quiser, por exemplo, descrever a última e verdadeira teoria ética moral em 98 volumes, eu posso transformar isso num algoritmo, porque é um livro de receita. Daí, é claro, daí tem o problema de aterramento, significado das palavras, coisas um pouquinho que daí fogem um pouquinho da nossa discussão. Mas eu gosto dessa estratégia que a senhora falou, tipo, pensar no pior resultado possível. Tipo, até isso é uma estratégia de tomada de decisão em inteligência artificial que se chama min-max regret, que tipo, o agente ele toma a decisão pensando no pior resultado possível e ele sempre tenta maximizar a utilidade pensando nisso. Qual é a utilidade? Qual é a ação que previne que eu receba o pior desconto possível? E essa é uma boa forma de tomada de decisão. Isso a gente aprende em economia e se tiver algum economista aqui pode até falar melhor do que eu sobre isso. Mas isso é basicamente, pelo que eu entendi, o Hans Jonas ele propõe isso, min-max regret, tipo, evita isso. Recentemente eu escrevi um artigo que eu publiquei junto com o professor Itamar, que ele fala sobre metanormatividade, e se eu pudesse recomendar, eu vou procurar agora essa obra do Hans Jonas, porque me interessou, eu me interesso muito por normatividade, mas na minha opinião, uma das estruturas normativas e metanormativas mais interessantes que eu achei até hoje tem um professor em Oxford, o nome dele é William MacAskill, e ele é fundador, junto com o Toby Ward, do movimento Altruísmo Efetivo. E ele desenvolveu uma estratégia de tomada de decisão que se chama Maximization of Expected Choice Worthiness. E é um modelo matemático para tomada de decisão normativa, que eu acho, sinceramente, assim, brilhante. Brilhante. Ele não transpôs, ele não resolveu o is-ought problem, ele não transpôs o penhasco, o gap ainda está para problemas de incerteza normativa que eu realmente considero muito boa. É moralmente pluralista, engloba teorias éticas deontológicas, teorias éticas consequencialistas, então, tipo assim, ele consegue pegar na minha opinião, toda a estrutura, colocar ela dentro de uma única estrutura metanormativa que a gente consegue trabalhar problemas de incerteza moral. E parecido com isso que a senhorita falou agora, tipo, de tentar minimizar o maior erro que eu posso fazer. Tipo, se o evento contrafactual que pudesse acontecer vai causar um grande dano a alguma coisa, bom, ele não vale o pequeno ganho de utilidade de uma, sei lá, se for um vegetariano, tipo, o grande mal de matar uma vaca não vale o pequeno ganho de comer um pastel. Basicamente isso. Na verdade, esse artigo que eu criei é toda uma defesa, assim, de dilemas vegetarianos, porque tu não deve matar animais, na minha opinião.
Muito obrigado, Nicolas.
Obrigada.
Alguma pessoa tem alguma pergunta ou comentário ainda que queira fazer? Porque somente postando aqui no chat a gente pode saber que você ainda quer se manifestar. Se não, vou agradecer mais uma vez a todas e todos pela participação, pelas perguntas, pelos questionamentos, e passar de novo a palavra à professora Sofia.
Muito obrigada, Nitamar. Muito obrigada, Nicolas. Eu acho que é uma excelente experiência essa da multidisciplinariedade, né? É muita... E parabéns, viu, Nitamar e Nicolas, porque é uma conquista conseguir escrever em conjunto e conseguir produzir e também pensar, não é? Enfim, agradeço a todos, agradeço aos que fizeram perguntas. Muito obrigada.